Last week, which had blocked construction, saying the Belo Monte Dam didn't meet environmental standards. Critics say that the dam threatens the homes and livelihoods of 40,000 people who live in the area. In Argentina, at least 7 children from one indigenous community have died of hunger in recent months. Doctors say that the kids were malnourished and dehydrated. The Argentine government has begun an emergency plan to prevent more deaths. Teresa Bo reports from the town of Salta, near the border with Bolivia.
A healthcare emergency. These children belong to the Wichi indigenous community, and they are under serious risk.
Children are undernourished or their weight is very low. What they give us is a bag of food. It's obviously not enough for the children living here.
Throughout South America, indigenous communities are often amongst the poorest. In the last months, at least 7 children have died because of dehydration, diarrhea and undernourishment. Dina Sambo's son died a few weeks ago, probably from severe undernourishment. People say the infant was crying for days. Lack of education is one of the reasons some children don't get treated. Sometimes parents don't take them to a hospital in time.
We did not receive the government's help because we do not know how to claim it. We have national IDs, but sometimes there's so much bureaucracy that it is too difficult.
The deaths have brought the media spotlight to the area and forced the government to deploy an emergency team.
It is true, not enough help is being sent here, but the problem is deeper. These people were used to hunting and gathering. They used to fish in some of the rivers that have now disappeared. They have no land.
The government has implemented a universal plan to give money away to poor children so that their parents can buy some food and cover some of their basic needs. But in Argentina's most remote regions, where the presence of the state is not strong enough, children are still at risk.
Many indigenous groups in Argentina have found it hard to adapt to a changing world. Much of the land they used to inhabit has been taken over for farming. And though the country produces more than enough food, in some areas children are still in desperate need. Teresa Bo, AlJazeera, Salta.
And that's it from all of us here in Washington, D.C. Now back to Divya in Doha.
The UN is warning that rising oil prices resulting from the turmoil in Libya could impact the global food market. Prices reached a record high in February. Now, during 2010, food costs went up 38% in Kenya, 26% in Afghanistan and 31% in Indonesia. The price rise is being blamed on drought in grain producers like China and Russia, increased demands all over Asia and stockpiling by importers. Activists also blame the U.S. biofuel policy. The U.S. hands out $6 billion annually to farmers who sell their grain to ethanol producers. ActionAid says this creates artificial demand and inflates the price of corn. Colin Hendricks, a climate and food security expert at the University of North Texas, joins us now live from Dallas. Glad you could talk to us. We've run through some of the reasons why food prices have gone up, including climate and other factors like biofuels. How much, though, would you say the unrest we're seeing in the Middle East is affecting food prices in the region?
Well, that's an excellent question. If we use historical precedents as our guide, specifically the food price crisis of 2007 and 2008, we saw that unrest in some 48 countries, protest and rioting related to increasing food prices, actually had the effect of spurring the decisions in major grain exporters, specifically Indonesia, India, and China, for closing off exports. This obviously had the effect of making food more scarce in international markets and driving up prices. So yes, I think it's safe to say that the unrest we're seeing now can only add more volatility and more uncertainty into these markets.
If you could give us some perspective on food prices. Basically, a lot of what we're seeing right now has been fueled by the fact that food prices have risen something like 30% in the past year, grains and wheat and such. Do you see that feeding into this and continuing the political instability? Is that a likely scenario?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, the food prices are the classic, what we would call here in the United States, a kitchen table issue. This is one of the main issues that faces people of all walks of life, at all levels of socioeconomic strata, but in particular affects the world's poor. This is the type of thing that can get people out into the streets and protesting when food prices are so high. As we've seen in Tunisia and in Egypt specifically, once people have gotten into the streets, these protests that began about rising food prices and inflation more generally became protests about the repressiveness of the regimes that they faced, a general lack of economic opportunities, etc. So food prices are not the whole story, but we could say that in these cases that they were one of the sparks that brought people out into the streets in the first place. So to answer your question, yes, this is definitely a contributing factor.
And the other significance of the Middle East region is the fact that a lot of oil comes from there, and oil prices have been rising, not necessarily because of shortage, but mainly because people are anticipating instability. How much does oil price affect future food prices?
Well, oil prices are obviously a very significant determinant of food prices, especially as we've moved towards more mechanized and industrialized food production, both in the United States and other developed countries, but also in the developing world as well. The USDA estimates that an increase in oil prices of, say, a doubling in world oil prices can increase food prices here in the United States by anywhere from 15 to 20%. So it definitely is adding to the increase in prices. These markets are linked in the sense that you also have speculative capital and also the rise of these commodities as an asset class, so that people who are in the markets not necessarily to trade in the underlying goods, but to speculate and to try and make a little bit of income off of the rising prices themselves, are also getting into these markets. So that, in addition, is contributing to the volatility and the increased prices.
Colin Hendricks, Climate and Food Security Specialist at the University of North Texas. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Canada have been taking on Pakistan in cricket's World Cup.
Catch him!
A foregone conclusion, you'd imagine, or was it? We'll have the full story from Sri Lanka, plus the rest of the day's sport in just moments.